Okay, so in this tutorial, I'm going to take it to the next level where, we've been coding all semester within our setup and our draw. We've been looking at some logic. We've been getting used to coordinates and for loops and things like that. So the big payoff with coding, because you might be like, oh my God, it takes forever to do this, that, and the other, is when you can take this a simple set of instructions and package them. If you want to think of it that way, it's just an abstraction, but package them and then use them over and over and over again. It would be like figuring out a recipe for a cookie, is the example I use, and being able to say, now I figured out how to create one really good cookie. I'm going to create a whole bunch of cookies, and I'm going to put these instructions in there, and they can vary a little bit. So I get different types of cookies. I get different copies, I guess. It would be similar, but different. And I don't have to write out the instructions over and over and over and over again. I've already got them once they're written down, I can build this variability into it. So what we need to do is create a class to do this. So I have a sketch here. It's pretty similar to what I had done earlier in the semester when we were looking at Lerp. So it's just this idea that I'm creating a circle, and the circle is animating towards a randomly selected point out in space. I don't know if you can see, I've got the little point that's randomly selected out here in space, dancing back and forth a little bit. It has a little bit of random wiggle to it. So as this animates and tries to chase towards that, of course you can see that it tapers down. I'm just incrementing using Lerp on the radius of this little whoosh, whatever, right? So this is, I don't know if it's great or anything, but it's interesting. And I haven't gone to the next step. I haven't done like any preparation on this. I just sat down and thought, let's just see what would happen if I, instead of had one of these, what if I generated, 30 of them or 100 of them? And they went in different directions, right? So I keep resetting, they're going different ways and I get slightly different results. What if I could have a whole bunch of them? Now, I probably don't want to have, well, we'll see. I don't know how many will get in here. It gets a little too compact if they're going all different ways. And it's going to look like some kind of sunburst, something, some kind of flower maybe. So let's just see. So I'm going to go back into the code. And the whole time that we've been working in the class, we have something called my sketch, right? So this is the file that's been created. But in code, just like a Word document, right? We can have multiple documents, multiple pages of a book, if you want to think of it that way. So you can see every time I put my little cursor over my sketch, a little plus sign appears. And we could rename my sketch if I want. It's just the default. I'm going to leave it. But I'm going to go ahead and click on the little plus sign, and it says tab 2. And I'm just going to name this, what should we even call that? I don't know. I'm just going to call it Wisp. Because it's kind of, I don't know. It's the kind of sound that this object seems to make, I guess, right? So this is going to be a class or an object-oriented program, right? Programming. This is an object or a class. And it's going to have its own set of instructions. So most of the work basically is we're going to literally copy and paste this stuff into the class as I did in class the other day, right? So let's just talk about the main structure. So the first thing we need to have is something called class, right? So this just says, hey, I'm going to create this cookie. And the general convention, is to name the class with a capital letter, and then all the instructions for it are going to fit within a set of curly brackets, right? And then newest version of JavaScript over the past couple of years is writing classes with this constructor, which is a little bit cleaner. I'm happy to see this as opposed to this old type where they use something called prototype, right? So constructor is a function. We put the parentheses here. Stuff can go in this. Maybe do that in a different tutorial. For now, I'm going to leave that alone. And then this constructor, I'm going to put this, is like the global variables and the setup. Okay. So when I first establish what initialize these variables, and I declare what they are, this is all going to happen in this constructor. And then later on, I'll call this display. So this is like its own little custom function inside of the class. So we can say, hey, create a class. It's like, okay, I created one. What do you want to do with it? What goes into it? Well, the constructor says you need to have an X and a Y and a Z, whatever I'm going to put in here. And then in the display, and again, I could name this anything. I could call this render. I could call it run, whatever. So I'm just going to call display. And then I'm going to put the instructions in here, and this is going to be like the draw. Okay, so these are the pieces. So if you think about it, this is, I always like to think of this as there's function setup and function draw. This actually sits within a class called P5. So this is its own class, Wisp. And it needs to have all the stuff we're going to start with, and then it needs to have the things that are going to run. Okay, so the one thing, and once you get to this point and you start putting things down, is to save. Because I think if I click on this without saving it, this goes away. So make sure you save. Okay, so if I go to my sketch and I go to Wisp, it's still there, right? Okay, so this is a good idea. Okay, so before we do any copy and pasting, just to make sure that this is running as we go along, let's create something called W. And down here we're going to say W, and I'm using W for like Wisp, right? Equals a new Wisp, right? So W at the very beginning says, well, I'll go ahead and create a variable called W. I don't know what it equals yet, right? And then in the setup we say, W actually equals one of these new things that I just created. And the program's like, well, what the hell is a Wisp? I in my own program library, I don't understand this. And it starts looking in my program, and it finds Wisp and says, hey, there's something called class. Within this class, there's something called Wisp. I guess all the instructions for being a Wisp are in here. Of course, nothing is in there. Let me click on save. And let me go back here and just press play. And you can see my code runs, but I don't get any errors, right? So I always do this at the beginning. Most people would do this at the beginning, just to declare the class, just so there isn't some weird structure thing going on, right? Maybe if I don't have these curly brackets in the right thing, right place. So we have the constructor and open and close curly brackets in here, display, open and close curly brackets, and then for the class itself, these two close up the whole entire class, right? All the guts are inside of it. All right, so how do we do this? Let's copy. Actually, let's just cut all the stuff here at the beginning. Oops, what did I do here? Let's go back. Let's see, cut, there we go. My fat fingers, there we go, paste. So these are in there. The other thing too is I'm going to go to all the variables that I had in setup, except for the class, right? And I'm going to cut all that. And I'm going to put it in there, and then I'm going to go and get all the ones that are in the function. Now, I've put everything in here just because they were all part of the Wisp, the thing that I want to grow. If you had a more complicated program, right, you don't want to put everything into the class. If you were drawing rectangles somewhere else or lines somewhere else, like this is just the stuff that we need for the class itself. So it's just a little auto formatting. Let's say save, and let's go back to the Wisp. Okay, So we have this constructor, and we have let x, let y. We have all these variables. And then we also, down here, we declare what they are. So actually, we don't need, let's get rid of those. We don't need to say let in when we create a class. So we have x, y, blah, blah, blah. We have increment. I'm just trying to see if there's any duplication. Yep, we don't need random Annie in Lerp. Sorry. My mom's texting me, believe it or not. Funny. Okay, so I don't need this R Annie value, right? So this is the, well, I'm not going to talk about like the individual components, right? They're all part of that little animation. So let's just get rid of those. And I've declared what these are, but I don't have a duplicate of that. Okay. And what I'm going to do is just put them down below here for a second. All right, so these are all part of the program, and I say, hey, x equals this, x equals that. So I don't need to say let. A constructor wants to know something else, and there's a keyword. So instead of let, we use this thing called this. JavaScript. This uses it all the time. I used to hate this, the word this, and having to do this. But the idea here is, the way I always think about it, is within the class, since I'm going to make possibly hundreds of copies, right? I want to get a certain set of instructions just to one of the wisps, and then another wisp is going to have its own set of instructions. So this is like saying this x, this y, is like saying the x and the y associated with this wisp, not the other wisps that I'm going to create. Like each one of them is going to have their own this x, right? This whatever. So anytime I use a variable like I would here, and I set what the value is in the setup, I'm going to want to set up this little naming convention here. It's like saying, let x equal with this, width divided by 2. Now I'm saying this x that's part of this constructor is going to equal that. So each time, every time I create an x and a y, it's going to be at the width divided by 2. But every time I create an x2 or a y2, they're going to be some different random location, or there's going to be a different random speed. This one is just going to be 5. I could change the speed the way this increments if I wanted to. I'm not going to get into that. So, all right. So because I say this x and this y, I need to do the same everywhere else, right? And I could do the toggle replacement. I could do something like this. If I hit Command D, it will do multiple highlights. So I can say this x2 and Lerp speed, right? So if I double click and highlight that, and then Command D on the Mac, I have 2 of them right there. So I'll just type this Lerp speed. So it does them both, right? However you want to do it. And obviously, maybe if you have an idea of what it is that you're going to do at the very beginning of a program, maybe you start setting this up in a class right off the bat. So you don't have to come back afterwards and do this. But I think this is a good exercise to get used to the idea that you could write the one set of instructions as you're used to, and then translate all that information into the class itself. So let's double check here. So I have a constructor, this. R is of this, right? So anything that gets declared up here is this. I'm going to bring it down here because I want the object to have its own individual thing. Here, I maybe might not have to do that. I can do this a different way if I was just going to keep the number as exactly the same, but for now, we'll just leave it that way. Let's see, every variable. Now, I don't need to say this stroke, right? Stroke is a function that each one of these is using, so I want them all to, oops, I actually don't need, sorry, I had that from leftover before. So I want every one of them to have a fill, and in this case, I'm going to have them all have the same. If I wanted them to have a different one, you know, I might want to say this C for color maybe equals random 255. In fact, maybe we'll come back to that here in a minute and add that. We'll see if it works. But right now, I'm going to make them all white with a transparency, right? All right, so that's good. Let's save as we go along, and we go back to my sketch. So we have let this variable w be created and let it equal one of these new wisps. And so if I run this, hopefully I don't see any errors, but I don't see anything running. And that's because we've only done the setup down, well, we've done the setup here, and we have this display. And again, this could be anything, right? I could call it render or whatever I want, whatever is helpful, right? But this just, I'm using display because I want it to, most of the instructions in here about displaying this thing that I wanted to draw. So to make that code run, I need to say, hey, W. So I'm going to say, let's go get this object that's a wisp, and let's reach down into it and call one of its functions that's down in here. So we say, hey, Wisp. Wisp says, yeah. What are you doing? Wisp says, well, I created these variables, and I have some instructions, but no one's told me what to do with them. So we use this dot syntax. It's just a way of going down. It would almost be like saying W display. It's like a breadcrumb trail like you might see on a file index, like W display, like whatever it might be, as I kind of go down a hierarchy. In this case, we're declaring what the object is, and then we're going to go get one of its functions that we've created. And we've only created one, so all I need to do is just run display. All right, so this works. So brilliant move, right? I've done all that work to recreate exactly what I already had. All right, let's do this differently. So what if we said W now equals a list? Okay, so now I don't want one of them. I want, let's just say, let I equal 0, and let's let I be less than, let's try 25, I plus plus. Right, so I'm going to create 25 of these wisps, and like we did with the images, we can just say, in that list, let's do the first one, the second one, the third one, the fourth one, right? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So every time I create one in the list, it's going to go to the Wisp instructions. It's going to generate these, but each time it's a little bit different, right? What the Wisp looks like. And it will run, or it will create each one of those. So now I need to use a for loop and do the exact same thing down here. So we say W, oops, and then we reach down inside of it and we say, well, which one of the lists, which one of the wisps are we going to use, right? And then run its own set of display. That's pretty groovy cool. I had no idea what this would look like. There's a couple little weird bits going on in some of these. In fact, I don't even know what's going on there. That's crazy. I don't know. Oh, well, maybe I had some bit in my code. I bet what it is because I was just running these and it basically got to the point where it's so small and it's just grayscale. And I never told it at some point to stop drawing that. Like if the radius gets so small, it keeps going. So that's kind of fun. We'll just let that run. And we can't really see it, but there's a bunch of little tendrils. There's one right there, right? Just drawing. So I could only see that now that there's multiples in there. All right, so what if we created a variable that said let total equal, so this way I can just change one number here at the top. So will these for loops be whatever I tell it to be here in the variable? What? 150 of those crazy things? Yeah. So I would probably need to write some code that says, hey, if the radius gets ultra small, let's stop drawing that, right? So we just put it on there. In fact, let's do that. if this r is greater than, let's say, 0.1, then let's go ahead and do this code. Right? Technically, I guess I could put this around the whole entire thing, but let's see what happens here. So they finally stopped, right? You can see that they're not going any further, right? So it got to a pretty small radius and then it just stopped. So again, the nice thing about this is I'm generating this really complex shape, but it's based on just one instruction set. And let's go ahead and add another variable, right? Let's let C equal random, let's say 100 to 255, right? So it's kind of gray through white. And then for the stroke, let's say this C, right? So I just called it C for color, right? It's really just going to be the grayscale, like this gray value between 100 and 250. Let's hit save. Right, but you can see I didn't have to change much code to get all that to work. You can see some of them are shading a little bit differently now, right? I'm getting some variation out of this. And they're getting longer here because the random values are, because I told it random width, right? They're further out here than this, so you get kind of this boxy shape. I could tighten that up so that the random values create more of a star shape, but that's just for my own gratification. I could look at that. I'm curious what happens if we just have some black fill in there. Right? All right, so this is really the whole idea behind kind of generative works. Really starts to get some muscle once we start using a class, right? So once we put a set of instructions inside of here, and you would imagine you can get very complicated how you can put these classes together. You could write a class and put that in a class and then put that class in your sketch, right? And so you could have multiple sets of instructions. So I could have a set of instructions that define a moon, right? A circle moving around a planet. And then I can take that class that defines a planet and put that inside a solar system. And then that would be its own class. And I could run, that set of solar system, instructions. And then each class is embedded with another object inside of it, right? So you can create a lot of complicated things that way. Okay, 23 minutes. It's a little bit longer than I like to do usually, but right. So this is just the beginning. I could start to add lots of different variation, lots of different rules that I might want to explore between this. But already this is starting to do some interesting and different and organic things. And all we're using is Lerp. All we're using is a circle. All right, happy coding.